The slap came so fast I didn't have time to react. My glasses went flying, shattering on the elegant ballroom floor as 130 guests watched in absolute silence. My cheek burned, but the pain in my chest was far worse. Daniel, my son-in-law, had just slapped me on his wedding day because I refused to hand over the keys to my apartment. "That's what you get for being so selfish," he screamed at me in front of everyone. "A man your age doesn't need so much space." The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved to help me as I crouched down, trembling, to pick up my broken glasses. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered among themselves. But no one, absolutely no one, dared to defend the poor old father-in-law who had just been publicly humiliated. My daughter, Emily, stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the floor as if I were invisible. "You're not welcome here anymore," Daniel continued, smoothing his pristine wedding suit. "Emily and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better." His words were pure venom. For months I had endured his condescending comments about my worn-out clothes, my old car, my simple life, but this had crossed a line that should never have been touched. I rose slowly, feeling all eyes on me like sharp daggers. Tears streamed down my face, but inside something had changed forever. That slap wasn't just a physical blow. It was the final straw. For years I had kept a low profile, living with humility and discretion. I had secrets no one, not even my own daughter, knew. Memories of the last few months began to bombard my mind as I slowly walked toward the exit. I remembered when Daniel first came to my apartment 2 years ago. His face fell when he saw my modest home, my old furniture, my small kitchen. "Seriously? This is where Emily's dad lives?" he had asked her, his voice just loud enough for me to hear. From that moment on, every visit had been a silent torture. "Jenny, you should move to a smaller place," he had told me 3 months ago during a family dinner. "At your age, you can't maintain such a big apartment. Besides, Emily and I are thinking of having kids soon. We'll need more space." His fake smile didn't fool anyone, except my daughter, who seemed to lose her personality whenever he spoke, acting like a puppet on a string. The humiliations had escalated gradually. First, it was the comments about my clothes. "Jenny, don't you have anything more modern to wear?" Then it was about my car. "That thing is ancient. You shouldn't even be driving it." Next, it was my part-time job at the local flower shop. "I don't understand why a man your age is still working instead of relaxing." Each phrase was a small poison dagger stabbing at my self-esteem. My name is Jenny Hughes. I am 68 years old, and all my life I have been a woman who prefers discretion over ostentation. I work at a small flower shop 3 days a week. I drive a 10-year-old car. I buy my clothes at discount stores. To the outside world, especially to Daniel, I am just a middle-class widow living on a fixed income. But that's exactly the image I have carefully cultivated for decades. What none of those people looking at me with pity knew was that my life had been completely different before my husband passed. My husband, Robert, had not been the office worker everyone believed. We had made a conscious decision to live modestly, to keep our true wealth a secret, to protect our family's privacy in a way that I now understood had been prophetic. As I walked out of the ballroom, the guests' conversations followed me like a toxic cloud. "Poor thing, she looks so fragile," whispered Daniel's aunt. "The groom is right, that woman can't take care of herself anymore," added Emily's cousin. "She should be in a retirement home, not living alone." Each word was like acid poured onto open wounds. The cool temperature of the ballroom's air conditioning contrasted sharply with the suffocating heat in my chest. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my cell phone and my worn black purse. a purse I had used for 5 years. Not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because I had learned to value practicality over appearances, something my son-in-law would clearly never understand. I dialed the number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't used in over a year because I had naively hoped it would never be necessary. Carlos, it's Jenny. I need you to come to the Royal Oaks Ballroom immediately. Yes, right now. Bring the documents you know about. It's time for them to know the truth. My voice trembled, but there was a firmness in it I hadn't felt in a long time. Are you sure, Miss Hughes? Carlos asked with his professional but concerned tone. Once we do this, there's no turning back. I glanced back at the ballroom one last time, where I could see Daniel laughing with his friends, likely telling them how he had put his useless father-in-law in his place. Emily was by his side, smiling weakly, showing not a single ounce of remorse for what she had just witnessed. Completely sure, I replied. 30 minutes, Carlos, no more. I hung up the phone and walked toward my car with determined steps. For the first time in years, I was going to drop the mask I had used to protect my family. For the first time, they were going to meet the real Jenny Hughes. And when that happened, when reality hit their perfect fake worlds, they would understand the true meaning of regret. The parking lot was quiet, lit by streetlights that cast long shadows between the cars. I sat in my old sedan and waited 30 minutes for their lives to change forever. 30 minutes for them to discover they had made the biggest mistake of their lives by humiliating the woman who had secretly been taking care of them more than they could ever imagine. While I waited in my car, memories of how I had reached this moment began to flood my mind like an unstoppable avalanche. It had all started exactly 2.5 years ago when Emily came to my apartment with that nervous smile I knew so well from when she was a girl. Dad, I want you to meet someone very special, she had told me. And there he was, Daniel, with his perfectly styled hair, his designer suit, and that smile that didn't reach his eyes. From the very first moment, I knew something wasn't right. The way he looked at my apartment, evaluating every corner with thinly veiled disdain, told me everything I needed to know about his intentions. How cozy, he had murmured as he looked at my secondhand furniture and my sun-faded curtains. His tone suggested the opposite. Emily, completely blinded by what she believed was love, didn't notice the condescension in his voice. That first dinner had been a silent disaster. Daniel barely touched the food I had lovingly prepared, claiming he was watching his diet. When I asked him about his family, he gave evasive answers, but not before asking me about my financial situation, with a curiosity that I found alarming. And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Jenny? It must be hard to get by on so little money, he had said with fake concern. What Daniel didn't know was that I had been observing him as much as he had been observing me. Over the next few months, I began to notice patterns that put me on high alert. Every time they visited my apartment, Daniel would make comments about how outdated everything was, about how I deserved something better in my golden years. But his eyes always lingered on the details that really mattered. The prime location of the building, the panoramic view from my balcony, the size of the rooms. One day, while Emily was in the bathroom, I heard him speaking softly on the phone in my kitchen. His words cut through me like a knife, but I maintained my composure when he returned to the living room, feigning innocence. From that moment on, every interaction with Daniel became a carefully orchestrated performance on both our parts. He played the concerned son-in-law, worried about his father-in-law's well-being, while I pretended to be the vulnerable old man who needed guidance. But inside, I was gathering information, observing his moves, understanding his true motivations. It was like a game of chess where we both thought we were winning. The following months brought a gradual escalation in his attempts at manipulation. First, there were the subtle suggestions. Jenny, I've seen some lovely apartments for people your age. All-inclusive services, no maintenance worries. Then came the more direct pressures. You can't keep living alone at your age. It's dangerous. What if you fall and no one finds out for days? Each argument was designed to make me feel incompetent and helpless. Emily, my own daughter, began to echo the same phrases like a trained parrot. Dad, Daniel is right. Maybe it would be better for you to consider moving to a more manageable place. Seeing her gradually transform into that man's puppet was more painful than any direct insult. The daughter I had raised with so much love and sacrifice now saw me as an obstacle to her happiness. The psychological campaign intensified after they announced their engagement. Visits became more frequent, but also more tense. Daniel had started bringing real estate magazines and brochures for senior communities. "I'm just exploring options for you, Jenny," he would say, spreading the materials on my coffee table as if it were a business negotiation. "I want to make sure you have the best quality of life possible." But I had been doing my own research. One afternoon, when they went out to run wedding errands, I decided to call an old friend who worked in real estate. "Amelia, I need you to investigate something for me," I told her. "There's a couple who are very interested in my apartment, and I want to know more about their real financial situation." What I discovered chilled me to the bone. Daniel and Emily were neck deep in debt. The wedding they were planning cost more than $50,000, completely financed with credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they were renting was on the verge of eviction for non-payment. The luxury cars they drove were financed with payments they couldn't afford. Their lifestyle was a facade built on suffocating debt. Everything started to make sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that had united this couple. It was the desperate need to find a solution to their financial problems. And my apartment, located in one of the most exclusive areas of the city, was their lifeline. The revelation hit me like a slap to the soul. My daughter, the girl I had raised with values of honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. She had allowed an ambitious man to convince her to see her own parent as a resource to be exploited instead of a person to be loved and respected. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. "Jenny, you can't keep being so selfish," Daniel had said to me just 3 days before the ceremony. "Emily and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with housing." His words no longer even wore the mask of fake concern. It was a direct demand disguised as a family favor. That night, I had made a decision that would change everything. I called Carlos, my financial advisor, and the only man I had completely trusted since my wife, Nora's death. "Carlos, I need you to prepare some documents. It's possible I'll very soon have to reveal information I've kept secret for years." His voice had become serious immediately. "Mr. Hughes, are you sure this is the right time?" He had warned me, with the wisdom of someone who had handled my affairs for more than a decade. Once this information is public, you can't take it back. The consequences could be devastating for family relationships. But I had already made up my mind. The family I had tried to protect with my silence had chosen to betray me. And now, sitting in my car in the ballroom parking lot, waiting for Carlos to arrive, with the documents that would change everything, I realized the moment of truth had come. 25 more minutes, and Daniel, Emily, and all those guests who had looked at me with pity would discover who Jenny Hughes really was. 25 more minutes, and their perfect worlds built on lies and greed would crumble like sandcastles. The night breeze rustled the tree leaves around the parking lot, creating dancing shadows under the lights. It was strangely poetic that, on such a beautiful night, so many illusions were about to die forever. 20 minutes had passed since my call to Carlos, and every second felt like an eternity. From my car, I could see the golden lights of the ballroom, hear the cheerful music and laughter spilling out of the open windows. It was surreal to think that in just a few minutes, that celebration would turn into a nightmare for the main players. I closed my eyes and let the most painful memories of the last few months flood my mind. I needed to remember exactly why I had reached this point of no return. The biggest humiliation had happened just 2 weeks before the wedding, during what Daniel had called an important family meeting. He had arrived at my apartment, accompanied not only by Emily, but also by his parents. A perfectly planned ambush. "Jenny, we want to talk to you about your future," Daniel's mother, a haughty woman who looked at me as if I were a bothersome insect, had begun. "We believe it's time for you to make responsible decisions about your life," continued Daniel's father, a burly man who surveyed my apartment with the eyes of an appraiser evaluating a property. "At your age, living alone in such a big place is not only unnecessary, but dangerous. What if you have a medical emergency and no one finds out for days?" Their words were rehearsed, too perfect to be spontaneous. Emily had remained silent throughout the conversation, nodding occasionally like a well-trained puppet. Seeing her there, sitting next to a family that treated me like an obstacle, was like watching the daughter I had raised die before my eyes. "Dad," she finally said in a voice I no longer recognized, "they're right. Daniel and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you moved to a place more appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age?" I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me. "And who gets to decide what's appropriate for me? You?" Daniel's mother exchanged a knowing look with her husband, as if my words confirmed something they had already discussed. "Jenny, we understand this can be difficult to accept," she said in a syrupy tone, "but you must think about what's best for Emily and Daniel." "What's best for them?" I murmured, beginning to understand the true dimension of the conspiracy that had been woven behind my back. "And I suppose my apartment would be perfect for them to start their married life, right?" The awkward silence that followed my question was all the answer I needed. They had planned every detail of this conversation, every argument, every psychological pressure. I had looked at each of them in turn, letting my silence stretch long enough to make them uncomfortable. "Get out," I finally said, my voice low but firm. "Excuse me?" Daniel's mother blinked, shocked. "I said, get out of my house," I repeated, rising from my armchair with a calmness that startled even me. "All of you, right now." Daniel laughed nervously, clearly not expecting resistance. "Jenny, don't be ridiculous. We're just trying to help you." "Help me?" I cut him off, my voice suddenly sharp. "No, Daniel, you're trying to help yourselves. Don't pretend otherwise." Emily's face flushed red. "Dad, please don't make a scene. We're just talking about what's best for everyone." "No, Emily," I said quietly. "You're talking about what's best for him. Not for me, not for you. For him." Her eyes welled with tears, but I didn't soften. There was a time when seeing my daughter cry could shatter me. That time was over. When they left, Daniel threw one last look over his shoulder, cold, calculating, already plotting his next move. I knew then that this battle wasn't over. And 2 weeks later, it culminated in that fateful slap. The sound still echoed in my mind as I waited in the car outside the ballroom. I could almost hear the whispers again, the pitying murmurs, the faint gasps of shock. But now, with every passing minute, the humiliation was being replaced by something else. Strength. At precisely 30 minutes past 9, a black Mercedes pulled up beside my car. Carlos stepped out, impeccably dressed as always, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. His expression was grim but resolute. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this, Miss Hughes?" he asked once more as he handed me the briefcase. I nodded without hesitation. "I've never been more certain in my life." "Then I'll follow your lead," he said. We walked together back toward the ballroom. The moment we stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The music dimmed slightly, conversations faltered, and every eye turned towards us.
Daniel was in the middle of a circle of friends, drink in hand, laughing. When he saw me, his smile froze. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone sharp with annoyance. "Didn't I make myself clear?" "You did," I said calmly. "But there's something you should see before you continue celebrating your marriage." Emily looked at me, clearly uncomfortable. "Dad, please not now. This isn't the time." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time," I interrupted, signaling to Carlos. He stepped forward and placed the briefcase on a nearby table, opening it with a soft click. Inside were several folders, neatly arranged and sealed with blue ribbons. "These," I said, my voice steady, "are documents proving the ownership of this building, where my apartment is, and of 12 other properties across the city. Each one fully paid for, registered under my name."
A collective murmur swept through the room. Daniel's smirk vanished. "That's impossible," he blurted out. You live in that tiny apartment like some kind of, like some poor old widow," I finished for him. "Yes, that's what you all thought, isn't it? That I was some helpless, insignificant woman living off a meager pension." Carlos handed him a document. "This is a copy of Miss Hughes's trust fund statement," he said coldly. "It totals a little over $8 million, fully liquid and with significant real estate assets attached. Would you like to verify it?" Daniel's face turned pale. Emily looked from him to me, her lips trembling. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because it wasn't necessary," I said softly. "Your mother and I decided long ago to live modestly, to stay out of sight. We wanted you to grow up valuing kindness, humility, and love, not money." "But you let me think," she started, her voice cracking. "But you let me think," she started, her voice cracking. "I let you believe what you chose to believe," I said, meeting her gaze. "When you met Daniel, I warned you. I told you to look beyond appearances. But you didn't want to listen." The guests were silent now, hanging on every word. Daniel took a step forward, trying to regain control. "You expect me to believe this? That you've been sitting on millions while pretending to be poor? That's absurd!" Carlos raised an eyebrow. "You're free to verify every word, Mr. Blake. The bank accounts are legitimate, the deeds authentic. I assure you this is no illusion." The arrogance in Daniel's expression flickered into raw panic. "So what now? You're going to humiliate me in front of everyone?" I smiled faintly. "No, Daniel, you already did that to yourself." I turned to the guests, my voice carrying through the room with calm authority. "I apologize for the scene earlier. It seems I was mistaken in thinking my daughter's husband had a sense of respect. I see now that money was his only language, so I decided to speak it fluently tonight." Gasps rippled across the crowd. Some guests began whispering. Others avoided Daniel's eyes entirely. Emily stood frozen, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "I wanted this day to be special for you," I said to her gently, though my heart was breaking. "But you've chosen your path, and I have to choose mine." Carlos handed her a smaller envelope. "Miss Hughes has decided to update her will as of this evening," he explained quietly. "All previous beneficiaries have been removed. The assets will now be transferred to a foundation in her late husband's name." Emily stared at me, horrified. "Dad, you're disinheriting me." "No," I said softly. "You disinherited yourself the moment you stood by and watched that man hit me." For a long moment, there was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then Daniel lunged forward, his face twisted with fury. "You can't do this! You old witch, you can't—" Two security guards moved swiftly, grabbing him by the arms before he could get any closer. "Mr. Blake," the ballroom manager said curtly, "I think it's best you leave." Daniel struggled, shouting incoherently as they dragged him toward the exit. Emily followed, sobbing, but I didn't move. I simply watched them go. The music had stopped completely. The guests stood awkwardly, unsure what to do or say. I could feel their pity, their admiration, their confusion, but none of it mattered anymore. Carlos placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's done," he said softly. I nodded. "No, Carlos, it's just beginning." We walked out together into the night air. The wind felt different now. Cleaner, freer. As I reached my car, I looked up at the stars scattered across the sky. For the first time in years, I felt no heaviness, no burden of pretense. My daughter had chosen her path, and I had chosen mine. Painful as it was necessary. The slap that had humiliated me had also awakened me, reminded me who I truly was. Jenny Hughes, widow, florist, survivor, and the woman who had quietly built an empire while the world underestimated her. I started the car, the engine humming softly. In the rearview mirror, I saw the ballroom lights fading in the distance, along with everything that had once tied me to that toxic web of deceit. As I drove away, I whispered into the night, "Rest easy, Nora. Justice has been served." And with that, I disappeared into the darkness, not as the frail old woman they had mocked, but as the woman they would never forget. The morning sunlight streamed gently through the windows of the small flower shop, filling the air with the scent of lilies and jasmine. I was arranging a bouquet when the bell above the door jingled softly. "Good morning, Miss Hughes," said a familiar voice. I turned and smiled. Carlos stood there, as elegant as ever, holding a coffee cup in each hand. "I thought you could use a caffeine refill," he said. "You always know when to appear," I chuckled, taking the cup. "How's the foundation paperwork going?" "All finalized," he said proudly. "The Robert and Ginny Hughes Foundation is now officially recognized. The first scholarships will be awarded next month." I felt a warmth bloom in my chest. "Robert would have been proud," I said softly. Carlos nodded. "He would have been proud of you." A year had passed since that unforgettable night in the ballroom, the night the masks had fallen and truth had taken center stage. The world hadn't been the same since. After Daniel's public meltdown, news of his assault spread quickly. Several guests had recorded the scene, and within hours, the videos went viral across social media. A well-dressed groom slapping his elderly mother-in-law at his own wedding? It was the kind of scandal people devoured. Daniel tried to salvage his reputation, claiming I had provoked him, that I was mentally unstable. But with dozens of witnesses in the ballroom security footage, no one believed him. His employer, a prestigious consulting firm, terminated his contract the following week for behavior incompatible with company values. Emily filed for divorce 3 months later. I didn't attend the hearing. It broke my heart to know how far she had fallen, but I also knew she needed to face the consequences of her choices. Sometimes pain is the only teacher strong enough to rebuild a soul. She called me once, weeks after leaving him. Her voice had lost its usual sharpness. "Dad, I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say that." I didn't respond right away. There was too much silence between us, too much that words couldn't fix. Finally, I said, "You're always my daughter, Emily. But forgiveness isn't a gift. It's a process. Let's both take our time." She cried softly on the other end. Then, before hanging up, she said something I never forgot. "I've started volunteering at a shelter," she whispered. "Maybe helping others will help me too." Since then, she hadn't called again, but Carlos sometimes updated me, discreetly, respectfully. Emily had found a modest apartment and started working at a small community center. She was living simply for the first time in her life. It wasn't wealth that made a person rich. I had learned that the hard way. Perhaps now she was learning it too. As for Daniel, the last I heard, he had moved to another city, trying to rebuild his life. The internet never forgot his name, though. The man who slapped his wealthy mother-in-law and lost everything. His infamy followed him like a shadow. It was poetic justice. I, on the other hand, found peace not in revenge, but in purpose. The money I had once hidden from the world now served a cause worth fighting for. The Robert and Ginny Hughes Foundation focused on helping young widows and single parents start over, offering education, housing, and microloans. In less than a year, we had already funded 18 scholarships and helped 12 women start small businesses. I still lived in the same apartment, despite everyone suggesting I move. I had renovated it a little, fresh paint, new curtains, but it remained the same cozy place that had once embarrassed Daniel so much. It was my home, my sanctuary. Sometimes, when I looked out from the balcony, I could see the city lights stretching endlessly across the horizon, and I would think about how easy it is for people to mistake simplicity for weakness, and how wrong they were. Carlos broke the silence of my thoughts. "The press wants to interview you again," he said with a teasing smile. "The mystery florist millionaire has quite a following." I laughed. "They'll have to settle for another statement from the foundation. I'm too old to be anyone's headline." "You are not old," he said kindly. "You're timeless." I gave him a mock glare. "Flattery won't get you a pay raise, Carlos." He raised his hands in surrender, grinning. The bell above the door rang again, and a young woman entered hesitantly. She was holding a wrinkled newspaper clipping, an article about the Foundation's scholarship program. Her clothes were simple, her eyes tired but full of quiet hope. "Are you Miss Hughes?" she asked softly. "Yes, dear. How can I help you?" I read about your foundation," she said nervously. "I lost my husband last year, and I'm trying to finish nursing school, but I can't afford tuition anymore." Carlos handed her a chair. I smiled and reached across the counter, gently touching her hand. "You came to the right place," I said. "Tell me your story." As she began to speak, tears filled her eyes. I listened, really listened, the way I wished someone had listened to me when Robert died. By the time she finished, I had already made my decision. "Consider your tuition covered," I said softly, "and if you ever need a part-time job, we can use some help here in the shop." Her mouth fell open. "Really?" "Really," I said, smiling. "Everyone deserves a fresh start." She hugged me tightly, and for a moment I felt something shift inside, a quiet peace that no amount of money could ever buy. When she left, Carlos turned to me, eyes glistening. "You know, Jenny, you could have spent the rest of your life bitter, but instead, you built something beautiful out of your pain." I looked around the flower shop. The rows of tulips, the soft hum of the radio, the faint laughter from the street outside. "Life has seasons, Carlos," I said. "Winter always comes, but so does spring." Outside, the afternoon sun spilled golden light onto the sidewalk. I picked up a white rose from the counter, twirling it gently between my fingers. Robert used to say that roses were the most honest of flowers. Beautiful, but with thorns sharp enough to defend themselves. I smiled at the thought. That night at the ballroom, I had finally found my own thorns. And now, every blossom in my shop, every scholarship, every life rebuilt, was proof that even the most delicate souls can learn to protect themselves without losing their grace. As the day ended, I flipped the shop sign to closed and locked the door. The city glowed in the twilight, alive and shimmering. I walked to the corner cafe, coffee in hand, feeling the same quiet strength that had carried me through that storm. The world underestimated Jenny Hughes, and I had let them, until the day they learned the truth. The autumn breeze carried the scent of rain and maple leaves as I walked slowly through the garden of the Robert and Jenny Hughes Foundation. It had grown from a single office into an entire campus, classrooms, a daycare center, a garden bursting with roses. Everywhere I looked, life bloomed. Children played near the fountain, young women carried notebooks and hope in their eyes. Robert would have loved this place. "Miss Hughes?" called a voice from behind. I turned and froze. Standing at the gate, holding a small bouquet of white tulips, was Emily. She looked different, thinner, quieter, her eyes older but softer. Gone was the designer arrogance, replaced by something deeper, humility. "May I come in?" she asked. I nodded. "Of course, my dear." She walked toward me slowly, her steps hesitant. "It took me 5 years to find the courage," she said. 5 years to stop being ashamed." I smiled faintly. "We all need time. The important thing is that you came." She handed me the bouquet. "I grow them myself now," she said shyly. "I work in a community garden. It's not much, but
It helps people. They're beautiful, I said, inhaling their scent. Tulips, Robert's favorite. She smiled, tears filling her eyes. I know. You used to tell me that every spring when we planted them together. For a long moment, we just stood there, mother and daughter, silence speaking louder than words. Then she said softly, I've changed, Mom. I know you probably don't believe me, but I learned what matters. I live simply now. I volunteer. I don't need anything from you. I just needed to see you. I reached out and took her hands. They were calloused from work, but warm and real. Emily, I never stopped loving you, I whispered. But love without truth can't survive. You had to find your truth first. She nodded, tears streaming freely now. Daniel ruined everything. But the truth is, I let him. I wanted the easy life. You tried to mourn me, and I didn't listen. I'm so sorry for all of it. For that night, for the slap, for standing by. Her voice broke on the last words. I pulled her into my arms. It's over now, I said, feeling her sob against my shoulder. The past can't be changed, but forgiveness can build something new. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clear. Do you think we could start again? I smiled. We already have.
Months passed after that reunion. Emily began volunteering at the foundation, quietly, diligently, never asking for recognition. She helped design programs for single mothers and ran art workshops for children. People adored her. They called her Miss Emily, never realizing she was my daughter. One day, Carlos leaned over my office desk with a teasing smile. You know, if you don't tell the staff she's your daughter, they'll start guessing. You two have the same stubborn kindness. I chuckled. Let them guess. Emily wants to earn her place on her own, and I respect that. He nodded. She's become quite the force. You should be proud. I am, I said softly. More than she knows. That winter, the foundation hosted its 5th anniversary gala. It wasn't like that dreadful wedding night. No arrogance, no hypocrisy, just warmth and gratitude. Emily stood beside me as we addressed the crowd. When it was her turn to speak, she took the microphone, her hands trembling. 5 years ago, my mother taught me what real strength looks like, she said. She built this place not out of pride, but out of compassion. I was lost once, greedy, blind, and she forgave me. Everything I do now is to honor that forgiveness. The room erupted in applause. I felt tears prick my eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. After the gala, we sat together in the garden beneath a starlit sky. Do you ever regret revealing everything that night? Emily asked. I thought about it. No, I said. Sometimes the truth must shatter us before it can rebuild us. She nodded. It did rebuild me. We sat in silence for a while, watching the roses sway in the breeze. Then she turned to me and smiled. Mom? Yes, dear? I think it's time the world knew who I really am, Jenny Hughes's daughter. I laughed softly. Then let's tell them. The next morning, the foundation's website featured a new headline. From Broken Bonds to Blooming Futures, the story of Jenny and Emily Hughes. The article told our story, not of wealth or scandal, but of forgiveness and rebirth. Within days, letters poured in from people who had reunited with estranged parents, children, and loved ones. Sometimes healing doesn't make noise. It just spreads quietly, like roots under the soil. Years later, when I finally stepped down as director, Emily took my place. The first project she launched was a new scholarship for single parents pursuing higher education. She called it the Rose Program. When reporters asked, why the name, she said, because roses are beautiful, but they also have thorns. My mother taught me that both are necessary to survive. Now, in my twilight years, I spend my mornings tending to the garden and my afternoons writing letters to the young women we've helped. Sometimes Emily visits with her daughter, my granddaughter, Nora, named after the woman whose quiet strength began it all.
When Nora runs through the garden, laughing among the tulips, I feel peace wash over me. The past had once been a wound, but now it was a scar, healed, honored, and no longer painful. Love had taken root again, stronger than ever. And as the sun sets each evening over the foundation that bears our name, I whisper the same words I did that night 5 years ago. Rest easy, Robert. We made it.